Bills Mafia tonight on the Air Raid Hour. We are taking a look at James Cook's now uncertain future with the Buffalo Bills and looking back at the 2024 and 2021 NFL draft classes as we try to dissect how these former classes will impact this upcoming 2025 off season. Stay tuned. This is one you won't want to miss. But first,
welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour. My name is Steve Mathis. You can find me on Twitter at The Bills Guys. Joined as always by my co-host Dave Tilton. You can find him on Twitter at Tilt Money. This show is brought to you by the Cover One Sports Network and Picasso's Pizza. And Dave, I'm just be honest with you, man. Sundays without football, yesterday kind of sucked. Like it dragged on.
It dragged on, but also like kind of in a way, it was a little bit it's a little bit more of closure, I guess, on the 2024 season for us, as obviously like the wounds are still there from the Bills losing that AFC championship game, I know. So this is like a way, at least for us to get that closure. The Chiefs didn't win the Super Bowl, so we don't have to hear about that. And we can officially turn the page and move on to the offseason, getting back into, watching golf on the weekends, F1 starting up again here in a couple weeks. So I've got to keep myself busy here from a sports perspective in some other ways. But the draft obviously is kind of the next, free agency, of course. It's a little bit more, it's going to be a little bit more subdued this year outside of a major trade. But the draft, we're about 2 months away.
Watching hockey. Got really into that Four Nations. So you can definitely tell it is the off season, and the sicko that I am just waiting for like the UFL to start up again so I can get my football fix back in. But right now, let's turn our attention back to the Buffalo Bills, because one member of the Buffalo Bills has decided to make himself the center of attention early in the off season, and that is James Cook. So let's start the show off today by talking about James Cook and what does his future hold. This drama all started last week when James Cook pinned a post on Instagram saying he wanted 15 million AAV, which of course turned some heads amongst everyone in Bills Mafia and national pundits alike, as that is more AAV than Saquon Barkley, the offensive player of the year, the Super Bowl champion now, obviously, of the Philadelphia Eagles. He followed it up with some tweets. He took references to the Bills off of all of his social media accounts. This podcast, at least I speak for myself, and maybe I speak for you as well. I really don't care what these dudes do. They do this every offseason, right? Asking for more money than they're probably going to end up getting. It's part of the negotiation process. Taking the pictures off of their social media handles related to the Bills. Like, James Cook is an older player. He was drafted as an older player. He's probably going to get one big contract before he turns 30. This is going to be it. I don't blame him at all for wanting $15 million a year. But of course, that doesn't mean the Buffalo Bills are going to pay it, which brings a lot of questions.
Brings a lot of questions, and we'll bring perfect segue here into Justin's super chat that came in right before the show even started. Said that he's not paying the Cook the money he wants to be a top paid running back. 37th in running back snap percentage this season. And look, you mentioned it as far as well, first, let me get to this other super chat. Another offseason with the Dreamboats Judge until and smash that. Like, thank you. Your boy Lettuce, always a loyal follower of the Air Raid Hour, has been with us for many years, so appreciate that. Look, it's interesting now, the negotiating process, that kind of the song and the tiptoeing, I guess, that kind of takes place now with some of these social media posts, right? Like, before social media, these guys probably were saying this stuff to their crew, right, to their guys that they're sitting around with and talking about this stuff with their friends, and we just never really see it, right? Like, James Cook could be in his his house talking to his brother. Obviously, is pretty vocal about it, obviously, and talking about, hey, I'm going to get 15 million AAV. But the reality is this is the starting point of this, and you don't necessarily want your starting point of a true negotiation to be on social media, but maybe it has some sway and maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But the reality is you never lead with your best offer if you're offering something to someone, and you never accept the first offer if you're trying to accept something either. So the reality of this is probably that James Cook will land somewhere under that $15 million AAV, whether it's from the Bills or otherwise. But he does deserve to get a second contract, whether it's from the Bills or otherwise. I don't know. I am in the camp right now that I think he deserves somewhere in the neighborhood of probably $10 to $12 million AAV. I think that's a fair deal for him. Probably a 3-year deal would make sense. I think, given his stature, he's not necessarily the Saquon Barkley sort of archetype as far as the physical stature, but he did prove this year that he could run between the tackles and he had some toughness to his game. So to me, I think a 3-year, $30 million deal, 3-year, $33 million deal, somewhere in that range, I think would be fair for both sides. It gives him over $10 million. It locks in the Bills, arguably second best offensive player, with Josh Allen being the first. You can argue about Khalil Shakir, whatever, but the second best offensive player probably on the Bills to term for a couple more years as they go through this run, with uncertainties really outside of James Cook and Khalil Shakir at the rest of the offensive skill positions. So I don't hate the idea of giving James Cook a second contract, but I do think if you're the Bills, you need to make sure that it works for you beyond 2025. And really the big question is going to be, as I know you're going to get to in a second, is what will his mindset and approach be coming into the 2025 season and training camp if he does not have a new contract?
Yeah, Jason M comes in and mentions his brother Dalvin, who's had contract issues before with the Minnesota Vikings. And a couple of years ago, I really underplayed, Trayvon Diggs' role in Stephon Diggs. And I was like, oh, you can't take brothers seriously, this or that, But it turns out like Trayvon was mirroring a lot of what Stephon was feeling. And I feel like Dalvin Cook probably has a lot of influence over James Cook. And a lot of the commentary that Dalvin Cook has made on social media, probably because that's some of the things that he's vibing from his brother as well. So I think you probably got to take some of that stuff into account. But at the end of the day, there's 3 real scenarios in which I can see playing out here. And I want to walk you through all 3 scenarios. And I want you to tell me which one you think would be best for the Buffalo Bills and what you think would be the option that you would choose or the scenario that you would choose moving forward. Scenario number 1 is that this offseason, with 1 year remaining on his contract, the Bills and James Cook reach some kind of an extension. I would think that 15 million AAV ask is a little bit of posturing from James Cook, and that it would wind up being closer to, as you mentioned, that $12 million range. The issue for Cook and the Bills, I think, would be term, because the Bills are not going to want to do a long-term deal. Cook is a little bit older. I think he's 27 years old now. Cook probably is going to want a longer deal. So the Bills have been snake bitten the past couple of years with some of their extensions, like Matt Milano and Dawson Knox and Tyler Bass. So this is
he turns 26 in September.
Turns 26 in September, right? So a second contract, would put him above the age of 30. So maybe a 4-year deal could work out for James Cook. Anything over that might be a little bit iffy, right?
Running backs aren't getting more than 4 years anyway, now, regardless of what he thinks. Like even Saquon didn't get 4 years. So,
but at the end of the day, like you could state that RB1, right, as the league is shifting again back to more balanced offenses, is just as vital or just as important as your wide receiver 2. So they should be getting that equivalent of a contract. So whether it's like, 3 years, 33 million, or 3 years, 36 million, or 4 years, $48 million, that would probably be somewhere in the range of a James Cook extension. So that's number 1, giving James Cook about $10 to $12 million AAV on an extension. I think he would accept that and come back to Buffalo. Scenario number 2, the Buffalo Bills tell James, listen, we'll negotiate next offseason when your contract is up. You're going to play out this deal for us. And you have very high likelihood of possibly entering free agency next offseason, right? If the Buffalo Bills, they ride him out through this season, they then let him go in free agency, they collect a compensatory pick, they draft another guy in the middle rounds to pair with what would be a third-year Ray Davis, who we're going to discuss later on in the show when we talk about the 2024 class, and Ty Johnson or another sort of veteran running back that the Buffalo Bills can find for cheap. This option, right? Scenario number 2, where the Bills tell James Cook, sorry, we're not negotiating this offseason. There's a high likelihood that that would lead to a holdout. And I would bet my money on James Cook not showing up to training camp if this happens, based on all the comments that he has made so far this offseason. So I think he'll show up by week 1, but will he be conditioned? Will he be in shape? Will his head be there? Like all those various different things that you need to think about in scenario number 2. And then you have scenario number 3, which is, and I can't believe we're talking about this, is not something I imagine us talking about just a couple of months ago, trading James Cook, right? I'm looking at you, Las Vegas Raiders, and your lack of running backs in the backfield. Maybe the Buffalo Bills could go out and collect a second or a third round pick and then use that pick that they collect for James Cook to draft a running back somewhere on day 2 or day 3 in this historically deep running back class, to then insert with Ty Johnson and Ray Davis into a new sort of rotational backfield for the Buffalo Bills. This is the tough one because Cook was phenomenal and we are in this window and we might not want to risk losing the production that James Cook provided this year. Also, will there even be a market for James Cook? Again, as I just stated, this is an historically deep running back class. Is there a team out there that's going to want to give a second round pick or a third round pick for James Cook? As one pundit put it, it's like 2 running back draft classes put into one this year. So we have scenario 1 where the Buffalo Bills give him about 10 to 12 million AAV over 3-4 years. We have scenario number 2 where they let him hit free agency next year, collect the compensatory pick, ride him out, but likely have to deal with a holdout. Or we have option number 3 where they try to trade him and then replace him. Which of these 3 options do you think is most beneficial to the Buffalo Bills?
Most beneficial? Man. I think the most likely is probably scenario 2. I think that I don't know that the Bills are going to give him a new contract before this season starts. I think that, and as Roy says, he has still 1 year left. So I don't know that they want to give him a new deal while he still has this obviously last year. Now he would be playing on an expiring contract, and I get that, and he'd be going in free agency. But they've had other guys who have done that as well, and they've given them the contracts in that upcoming offseason. Spencer Brown, a guy we're going to talk about in a little bit here. But the thing I think you have to kind of, I don't think you can look at the draft and say, okay, it's a guarantee we're going to get a running back to replace him, a guy of his caliber, whether that's Ray Davis who steps up and kind of fulfills that role. I don't know, right? Because then that's kind of, you're pigeonholing yourself to then sort of take a running back. Most people, and at least for me, I'd rather go heavy on defense, at least early in the draft. Yes, it's a deep running back class, so maybe on day 3, you can still get a pretty meaningful contributor. That's been the case. We've seen running backs on day 3 be meaningful contributors in the league on the rookie years, on the rookie deals. But I also wonder about sort of what that means for the Bills as far as like this upcoming season in 2025. Like, if the Bills can give James Cook something that's 3 years or less on term, I don't think that's necessarily a bad investment. So I would say the most beneficial thing to the Bills is probably scenario 2, where they let him play out 2025, see how it goes, see if he can sort of continue that ascension, right? But at the end of the day, they were kind of a 3-man committee, although he was the primary back and scored all those touchdowns. We may be having a different conversation if the Bills actually used James Cook on that final drive in the AFC Championship game, and he kind of was that incredible touchdown he scored was kind of forgotten about because the Bills lost the game. So I think that the narrative would be a little bit different depending on sort of how the outcome of that ended. But man, it is tough. Brandon Beane has not paid a running back since he's been the GM of the Buffalo Bills. He's drafted and churn and burn these guys. He's let Devin Singletary walk. He's obviously traded or let go Zach Moss, right? Like, They drafted James Cook in the second after trading down multiple times. They haven't made a big investment from a dollar standpoint in the running back position since Brandon Beane's been the GM. So history would say they won't, but maybe James Cook is the guy that changes things for them.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to consider. I think scenario 1 and scenario 2 are the two most likely options. Scenario 1 is if both sides can come to an agreement and the Buffalo Bills can feel comfortable and confident in that like 10 to 12 number, maybe they can get it down to like 3 years. I think the Buffalo Bills would pull the trigger on that, especially given like Sean McDermott's commentary in his end of the season press conference. Like he was all about James Cook and the energy James Cook brought and what a mistake it was not having him on the field on that last drive. Just the words that Sean McDermott had for James Cook and about James Cook in that end of the year press conference really stood out to me. So scenario 1, if the number is right, would not surprise me. But then scenario number 2 also wouldn't surprise me as well for the reasons that you mentioned with Brandon Beane. That'll come with the Buffalo Bills having to deal, though, probably with James Cook holding out of most of training camp. And then coming into week 1, not getting those reps that other guys are getting, maybe not being as conditioned. And the Buffalo Bills might have to rely on Ty Johnson if he's re-signed and Ray Davis if he's re-signed. They might have to rely on those guys earlier in the season as James Cook works his way back. Not to mention they might want to consider then drafting a running back and carrying 4 running backs next year if the Buffalo Bills also sort of get the hint that maybe James Cook is going to be holding out as well. So a lot of decisions left to be made. I know that the trade one has been very popular lately, and on paper it looks great. Nikki G comes in and says after Barkley and Henry, there 100% is a big market for the rushing touchdown leader. Jamal Williams led the NFL in rushing touchdowns with like 18 just a couple of seasons ago, and Detroit let him hit free agency and sign David Montgomery, and Jamal Williams just sat on the free agent wire for a couple of weeks before I believe the New Orleans Saints picked him up for a pretty modest deal. So Raheem Mostert, right, led the league in touchdowns last year, had a big touchdown number. The Dolphins did not give him some kind of extension and then ended up releasing him this offseason. So touchdowns, I think, are not the biggest indicator. And James Cook is not some workhorse, high snap share type of dude, right? It'll be interesting to see if maybe the Bills pay James Cook, let Ty Johnson walk, and try to create more of a 2-headed backfield as opposed to a 3-headed backfield.
Yeah, I mean, that's always an option. And I also like the theme for me, as we're going to kind of see as we go through these shows, and we're doing the salary cap show with Greg on Wednesday and kind of throughout this offseason, I think the theme that I keep coming back to is like, I don't want to create holes on this team just to create holes, because this team doesn't necessarily have a lot of glaring deficiencies, but there are holes on this roster that need to be addressed. That, like, running back is not one that I want to have to address in any sort of like meaningful way when it comes to draft capital. Like, if the Bills can come to some kind of term with James Cook where it's like a 3-year, $33 million or 3-year, $30-ish million deal. I mean, Saquon got 3 years, 37 in 3 quarters, right? When he signed with the Eagles. And I don't think that James Cook's going to get more than that, right? So I think the 15 is a little bit of posturing. I do think he should be under what Saquon Barkley is making. So he comes somewhere in that 10 to 12 range, I think is going to be okay. And I think I'm okay with that. And I don't want to create a hole in this roster just to create a hole. We have enough holes that we have to fill, especially on the defensive side. I don't want us to be in a position where we feel like we have to use early draft capital on a running back, which I know people hate anyway. So it's one of those situations where it's tough, right? Because you don't want to lose a playmaker, but I understand where people are coming from because they know the running back position in the last decade plus has really not been the position where you put dollars against it. And then you see kind of seasons like guys had, like Henry and Barkley of this year, and guys like Jahmyr Gibbs, and you can see what kind of difference those running backs make. And is James Cook on the Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry level? No. But I would say he's in the tier right below those guys. So he is making a meaningful impact.
Tom comes in and says, did GMs know this year would be a deep running back class? last year? If so, why would Beane draft Ray Davis? Well, to be honest with you, I think they had some kind of inkling that this running back class was coming 100%. But also, I think the Buffalo Bills drafted Ray Davis because Ray Davis is the type of runner the Buffalo Bills are looking for. You saw when James Cook got hurt, how effective Ray Davis was against a very good run defense that the New York Jets had. He had 150, plus all, all purpose yards in that game and helped carry the Buffalo Bills to a victory. And James Cook has sort of evolved his game, right? And I think to me, it surprised me. I wouldn't be surprised if it surprised or took the Buffalo Bills by surprise the way James Cook has evolved his game, because the player that we saw in college is not the player that we saw last year from James Cook. And to be honest with you, the James Cook we saw in year 1 was not the James Cook that we saw in year 3. Like he has got more power to his game. His vision has gotten better, like all these various different things. So I think the Buffalo Bills were, when drafting Ray Davis, envisioning maybe Ray Davis playing a bigger role, but James Cook, to his credit, stepped up. And even though he only had like such a minimal snap share compared to all these other workhorse backs, dude produced on like just such a massive scale to get over 1,000 yards on those touches that he got, to score all those touchdowns that he scored. That's a credit to him. Like he stepped up, had a huge year. And it's of course why we're having this conversation, because he wants to be rewarded for it. This Wednesday, you can catch us, yes, us, on the Cover One Buffalo podcast, as we will be taking part in the yearly salary cap extravaganza. Looking forward to that. The Bills are pressed against the cap again in 2025. There are levers to pull. We can make moves, but a lot of our success next season is going to be dependent on guys' in-house development. Dalton Kincaid is a name that comes to mind when I say things like that. McDermott and Beane sent a big message in their postseason pressers about him adding mass to be more versatile and more durable. That is why tonight, after our commercial break here, we are going to focus on last year's draft class, because I think the presence and projected development of guys like Keon Coleman, Cole Bishop, and Dwayne Carter could have a massive effect on the moves we make this offseason. But first, a word from our sponsor.
What's up, y'all? Khalil Shakir here. When I want Buffalo pizza, it's got to be Picasso's.
Picasso's.
Khalil Shakir. Your team, our pizza. Picasso's. This is Buffalo Pizza.
This episode is brought to you by Picasso's Pizza. With 4 convenient locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell, Picasso's Pizza has been serving Buffalo's best pizza since 1980. Whether you are a local or across the country, you can enjoy their delicious pizza delivered fresh to your door. Visit picassospizza.net to place your order today. Again, that is picassospizza.net. All right, Dave, we spent last week sort of ripping Brandon Beane a little bit about the lack of early production from the 2024 draft class. And while that criticism sure is valid, it's always important to note that there is context to everything. That context in this case is injuries. Keon Coleman was hurt mid-season last year, and the coaches admitted in their end of the year press conferences that he wasn't the same player after the injury. Cole Bishop was hurt in training camp last year, and it has affected his ability to be a starter from week 1. Dwayne Carter, he was hurt mid-season, went to IR, had surgery on his wrist, came back, and was never able to crack the lineup consistently when he returned. All 3 of these guys by next season should be healthy, and they could have a huge impact on the 2025 Bills and how the Buffalo Bills attack this offseason, because I see so many people talking about wanting to add a safety. I see so many people talking about wanting to add a defensive tackle, about wanting to add a wide receiver. And I think that there is a specificity to the wide receiver, to the defensive tackle, to the safety that the Buffalo Bills might be looking to add, because they're looking to complement these 3 guys, not replace these 3 guys.
Yeah, I mean, both or all 3 of these guys facing injuries at different times in the season as well. So it wasn't like they all were injured in camp and came back. Like Cole Bishop had his main injury during training camp. Keon Coleman sort of during the middle of the season. Dwayne Carter's was also kind of during the middle to later stages of the season. So it's tough because your top 3 draft picks from the 2024 class all lost time because of injury, and really all lost reps and possible development time as well. And look, we knew going into the 2024 season that Keon Coleman wasn't necessarily going to be thrown into the fire right away, although he did have some pretty meaningful impact early in the season before he got hurt. Dwayne Carter was playing well, I thought, before his injury, and it kind of stunted his maybe progression too. And then, obviously the injury to Cole Bishop during training camp really got him out of the block slow as it was. And this is going to be an interesting decision on sort of what the Bills do with, especially at safety, because DeMar Hamlin's a free agent, unrestricted free agent. He's had an obvious, like, real connection to the city and the organization. But as a football player, I think the Bills have to realize with the cap situation that they have, that it's likely that it should be Cole Bishop and Taylor Rapp as your penciled in starting safeties going into next year. Now, with the way Rapp plays and with the way he seems to always get hurt, whether through friendly fire or otherwise, I know the Bills are going to want to have 3 solid safeties they can rely on. So maybe that's a depth guy. Maybe that's a guy in the draft. There will be a lot counting on Cole Bishop this year, I think. Keon Coleman, it goes without saying, right? Like, Amari Cooper, like, the Bills traded for him. Seems like maybe behind the scenes there's some interest that they want to bring him back, but seems fans maybe are a little bit lukewarm on that idea. What's the dollars going to be? And again, with the cap situation, are you comfortable going into next year with Coleman, Samuel, and Shakir as your top 3? I think Coleman needs to step up in 2025 and be a more integral part. And then Dwayne Carter, as we know, Daquan Jones play slipped. There's not a lot of depth on that interior defensive line. Like, other than Zion Logan and Branson Dean, you really only have Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, and Dwayne Carter in the rotation right now under contract. So this is where the draft comes in as well. Daquan Jones, we'll talk about him in the salary cap show and what we're going to do with him. But there is a lot of pressure, I would say, on these 3 guys, particularly the top draft class picks from 2024, to step up in a big way in 2025.
Yeah, let's take a look at these 3 guys now in isolation. And let's start with the first pick, Keon Coleman. He had 29 catches this year on 57 targets. That's obviously not a great number, but he did have 556 yards, averaged 19.2 yards per reception with 4 touchdowns. Things started modestly, and they really started to heat up for Keon Coleman mid-season. At one point, he caught 9 of 14 targets in weeks 7 and 8. That's the Tennessee game, the Seattle game, for 195 yards and a touchdown before the injury that he sustained the following week in the game against Miami. And of course, as I mentioned previously, the Buffalo Bills coaching staff sort of lamented that he was never the same after that injury, but he was showing flashes of contested catchability, yards after the catchability, and he was getting after it as a blocker in the run game. Was it perfect? No, it was not. There was a lot of inconsistencies and mistakes scattered within all of that good that he was showing, but he's a guy who I think a lot of people want to write off. He's a guy that a lot of people want to dunk on, mostly because of their pre-draft narratives surrounding him. To that, I would pull out the old Lee Corso moniker of not so fast, my friend, because I have stated that I don't think Keon Coleman will ever be a wide receiver 1 in the National Football League, but I think he will be an integral part of this receiving core over the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, he has to be, right? Like, you don't want the Keon Coleman, and I'm not saying this is going to happen. There's a long way to go, but you don't want him to kind of be the next version of Kaiir Elam, right? Where you see a team like the Chiefs draft Trent McDuffie before you draft Kaiir Elam. You make this trade with the Chiefs. They draft Xavier Worthy. You have Keon Coleman. I know the teams have different needs, and I'm not like saying one thing or the other, but these guys are always going to be forever linked to each other. Keon Coleman, he did break his wrist, so I will give him a lot of benefit of the doubt there, but they need to kind of find the right ways again to use him. I thought they had some good chemistry, him and Josh on some of those back shoulder throws as things were getting going. Obviously, he made the really nice touchdown catch against the Seahawks, against Tariq Woolen, on the second attempt there. There's some hope there that he can blossom into something that can be a dynamic element to this offense if the Bills kind of get the right other mix of things around him within the rest of the offense going. And he can be a big part of this offense. And one of the things that was his strengths, obviously coming in out of the draft, were his hands. And there were a couple times where he had some drops last year as well. But I think he seems like the type of player that does have the right mindset to want to get better. And I know we talk about this a lot with the guys that the Bills draft. Like, they seem to have the right heads on their shoulders and all this, but at some time that needs to translate. They need to do it on the field. And I still have high hopes for Keon Coleman to be a meaningful contributor. But I just don't ever think that he's going to ever be a super high volume guy, right? I think he's going to kind of fall into the realm from a volume standpoint of what a Gabriel Davis was. And he's not Gabriel Davis as a player, but from like a realm of what
Production.
he contributes to the offense and production, I think he could fall into that range, is what I'm saying.
I really like this comment from Claude Puy. He says, Kansas City does a far better job of making life easier for their players than the Bills do. They gave Worthy the ball in so many advantageous positions. The Bills put Keon Coleman out there to sink or swim. And I agree with that to an extent. I do not think the Buffalo Bills were as good at scheming for Keon Coleman, certainly as the Kansas City Chiefs were at scheming for Xavier Worthy. Different players, obviously, but one of the things that the Buffalo Bills can do is put Keon Coleman in more positions that suit him. We talked about maybe utilizing him in some instances as a power slot. What was his big thing at the combine? Yes, he ran a slow 40, but he probably had the prettiest gauntlet of any receiver at the combine, and probably one of the prettiest, gauntlets of like the last 3 to 5 years. He got over 20 miles per hour. He was catching everything in that gauntlet drill. Why is he not running routes that have him going, east to west, those type of crossers, right? Why are the Bills not putting him in that position? You saw him catch a touchdown against the Jags in week 3, running that sort of route, and he had some success. Where was that the rest of the season? The Buffalo Bills seemed like they were pigeonholing him into doing these certain things like running verticals and putting him to these jump ball situations, etc. Maybe you should do things more so that suit his strength. And I think Joe Brady has an off season, number one, to figure that out. Number two, I think every offseason there's sort of a narrative surrounding Josh Allen about something he was not good at the previous season. And for him this year, I think one of the narratives that he needs to fix is that he was not that great in getting the ball up to Keon Coleman and Amari Cooper in those contested catch type of situations. And a lot of people are like, well, he just didn't look comfortable. That's not the kind of quarterback that Josh Allen is. He's not going to be throwing those 50-50, back shoulder type of throws. Well, he has dispelled every other narrative about him. Maybe that should be the narrative that Josh Allen tries to dispel this offseason. And if he can come back next offseason and he can be hitting Keon Coleman consistently on some of these back shoulder throws, putting him in better situations in these contested catch throws, we could really have something here if you combine that with putting him in more advantageous positions. I think the goal for Keon Coleman, and I don't know if they do it this year or if by year 3 this happens, but the goal I think for Keon Coleman should be to combine what he does with what Mac Hollins does. One player should be doing all of those things, because if you combine Keon Coleman's stats and Mac Hollins' stats in 2024, they combined for 60 catches, 934 yards, 15.6 yards per catch, and 9 touchdowns. That's pretty damn good. If Keon Coleman's ceiling is a guy who gets just a shade under 1,000 yards, catches 60 balls, and pushes double-digit touchdowns while making timely catches, being a red zone threat, and getting after it in the run game and playing a ton of snaps, that's pretty darn good, right? And I still think that there is a path for Keon Coleman to be a pretty darn good football player and a consistent part of this receiving corps.
Sounds like Gabriel Davis stat line to me. No, I mean, I'm being a bit cheeky there, but yeah, I mean, you're right. I think look, and we see he's not AJ Brown. I get that. But like the way the Eagles kind of have those receivers that complement each other with AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, like you saw AJ Brown in the Super Bowl and in the playoff games making some of those sideline sort of back shoulder catches from Jalen Hurts. And some of those slant routes where he was able to pick up yards after the catch. Like those are areas where Keon Coleman can excel. And we did see the Bills try to hit Coleman, although it was not in a ton of volume, but on some of these slant routes towards the end of the year as well, once he was back, to try to let him work a little bit after the catch, use that body and use those hands to box guys out on situations where you need to have a quick throw. So it's not always about necessarily that high yards per catch and the sort of the deep outs and the deep digs, but some of those quick slants as well, where you can use that body and use that frame and the hands to kind of make things a little bit easier as well. And like we see it all around the league when we talk about, like, a lot of times Bills fans, even throughout the drought, were like, why is it so easy for teams like Green Bay and others to just run these quick slants? Because they had a guy like Aaron Rodgers and Greg Jennings and Jordy Nelson running these quick, like Keon Coleman can be that guy for Josh Allen if they use him that way.
Next up on the docket is our other second round pick, Cole Bishop. We mentioned previously the shoulder injury in training camp that he suffered. It opened up the door for DeMar Hamlin to ultimately start the year as the Buffalo Bills' second safety, something that he never gave up. But Cole Bishop, because of injuries, did end up starting 4 games, a fifth in the postseason. He had 40 tackles, 25 solo, 2 passes defensed, and a forced fumble. He added a 10 tackle, 9 solo performance against the Chiefs in his 1 start in the playoffs. His most notable play of the season was unfortunately probably that miscommunication with Rasul Douglas in week 5, which led to the long Nico Collins touchdown. And to me, that play sort of epitomized Cole Bishop's season. He just never looked comfortable to me in 2024. He looked like he was always just trying to process, and he wasn't playing fast and he wasn't playing confident, and that did not allow him to make plays. It's not 100% surprising, though, given that the Bills' defense is notoriously complex.
Well, yeah. I mean, and the other thing is, like, there were a couple other plays in that game. He made a really nice tackle on what kind of saved a touchdown from Kareem Hunt. Playing downhill, I think that really suited him. But then, like you said, I mean, he made that nice play on Xavier Worthy where he came across and looked like he broke it up, or maybe even had the interception. They call it a catch. I mean, things go a different way on that play, and we can talking about Cole Bishop having a really meaningful impact in a playoff game. I do think that's going to bode well for him going into next season. That's the biggest game he could have played in all year, and then he got some starts leading up to that, obviously. I think the physical element of Cole Bishop's game is there, and it's waiting to be unleashed. I think it's just the mental side, playing fast, getting those reps. He got the reps, obviously, in those huge games. I think that's really going to bode well for him going into next season. And I think, honestly, out of Cole Bishop, Dwayne Carter, and Keon Coleman, for me, I think the arrow and the ceiling is pointing highest for me of those 3 guys is Cole Bishop.
Yeah, I mean, full year in the system, play faster, play more confident, start making plays. That's got to be the mantra for Cole Bishop in year 2. He is a great athlete. I mean, you saw the way he blew up the combine, his RAS score. It is what sort of elevated him into that second round conversation from, instead of maybe being a 3rd or a 4th round pick in college. You saw him just had such great closing speed, and he got to guys so quickly. You saw him do so many different things at Utah. You saw him blitz. You saw him play robber. You saw him drop into the deep middle of the field. That's why the Buffalo Bills were intrigued by him, because the Buffalo Bills want those split safety types. And again, he just looked a step behind in 2024 from a processing standpoint. It might have been a mental thing for him, and development isn't linear. I'm really expecting an uptick from Cole Bishop in year 2. I think he's going to surprise a lot of people, just like I think Keon Coleman is going to surprise a lot of people. And I think the logical starting point as we head into the offseason is to pencil in Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop as your starting 2 safeties heading into training camp. And to me, and this is the one thing that makes me a little queasy. To me, and I know the Bills are a true split safety system. I think if it is Rapp and Bishop, I would prefer Rapp center fielding more than I would prefer Bishop, especially now that we have Ryan Nielsen in the fray as sort of a senior advisor. He ran a lot of single highs, so we might see some guys drop back into center field a little bit more than we have in the past with the Buffalo Bills playing cover one. But I'm a little bit queasy about Cole Bishop being like that center fielding type, but who knows? Maybe he can prove me wrong in that regard. And I do think if the Buffalo Bills do go out and look for a safety this offseason, it's not going to be that like line of scrimmage box safety type. They're going to be looking for like the center fielder, the one that we've been asking for. If we do add one this offseason, I think it'll be more of a center fielding type, a change up to what Rapp and Bishop bring.
And that's kind of been the issue for them the last couple of years, right? They've had Hamlin, they've had Bishop, they've had Rapp, Poyer, obviously. I mean, Hyde's really been kind of the only true, I would call, center fielding with the center fielding ability. I do think Rapp is better suited for that than Bishop is. I do think Bishop's best plays are him in the box, coming down, guarding tight ends in the intermediate area of the field but his athletic ability is better than Taylor Rapp. So then you wonder, like, okay, and his speed is better than Taylor Rapp's too. So you wonder, is like, maybe there is a potential for these guys to truly become that split duo where they can interchange. It's not going to be, at least not likely in 25, going to be at the level of what we've seen from a Poyer and Hyde combination. But I can see that combination being fairly interchangeable, more so than Hamlin and Rapp, because they were somewhat interchangeable. But I could see Bishop and Rapp being interchangeable, although I know it's going to make people queasy. And I see people in the comments section already saying that makes them scared. And I get it, but you got to give Cole Bishop a chance.
The guy who sticks out in free agency is Andre Sisco. Like, he's a center fielding type. He played with Ryan Nielsen with the Jaguars last year. The Buffalo Bills, rumor has it, had interested him at the trade deadline. But if you go out and you pay Andre Sisco, he's going to be a decent chunk of change, a moderate free agent, right? Like, if you're paying him to center field, now it's a competition between Bishop and Rapp to start. And I don't know if Cole Bishop's going to win that competition, because Taylor Rapp played pretty decent, rather well when he was healthy this year. So now what's the role for Cole Bishop? Does he become your dime backer? Like, there's all these sort of questions. If you add this center fielder, I think the Buffalo Bills would have made me happier if they just would have drafted Kalen Bullock, one of the guys that I was touting last year, or DTD Rabbit, one of the guys I was touting for last year. But hey, Bullock had 5 picks for Houston center field in this year for D'Amico Ryans. Well, that one stings a little bit. I like Cole Bishop. I like the profile. I think he'll be better in year 2. But if the Buffalo Bills go out and add a safety and it's him versus Rapp, I don't know how he gets on the field.
And this is the debate, right? Because we know Rapp is prone to hurt himself, right? And we saw the Bills have to use 3 different safeties. Like, we were so spoiled with Hyde and Poyer. They very injury free for the most part for their careers here. Never came off the field, but in the last couple of years, we really had to rely on having 3 usable safeties. And from an asset allocation standpoint, you'd hate to have to spend money on a guy that you think you're going to have to use, because you know that Taylor Rapp is going to be off the field at times, but you don't want to invest a ton of dollars there. So what do you do? And then so you look at the draft and say that's where our best bang for our bucks is going to come. But is that really going to put us in a comfortable position if one of those guys goes out? I don't know. This is a tough one. I think you got to hope that you can find some kind of veteran bargain bin type of safety on the free agent market, like a Mike Edwards type that you kind of have on the roster as a break glass.
Marcus
just hope.
Epps.
Yeah, Marcus Epps. I like him as a guy that you just have in case you need him, and then you hope you actually hope you don't have to use him.
The next guy is 3rd round pick Dwayne Carter. He played in 11 games in 2024. He had 14 tackles, 11 solo, 5 tackles for loss, and 3 quarterback hits. His biggest play came on that huge game-changing 4th and 1 stop just after the half versus the Tennessee Titans in that game. I believe it was week 7 or 8 of the season. Tennessee could have double dipped. Dwayne Carter shut that down. The Buffalo Bills got the ball back, and ultimately ended up going on to roll the Titans when they were given a little scare in the first half there. But then he has the wrist injury. Then he goes on injured reserve. Then he has surgery. Then he comes back from injured reserve and from that surgery, but he's inactive every week to the likes of Jordan Phillips and Quentin Jefferson and Austin Johnson. So again, a very confusing year for Dwayne Carter. We talk about the need for a defensive tackle. Where's he going to fit? Because the Buffalo Bills are likely to add some defensive tackles this offseason.
I think the Bills have to presume that he is going to be one of their, quote, 4 guys in the rotation, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the defensive tackle position. This past year it was Oliver, Daquan, Austin Johnson, and in theory should have been Dwayne Carter as well. But then they had to bring in guys like Jordan Phillips off the street. Quentin Jefferson had to come because of the injuries. So I do think in the organization's mind, they'd love to see Dwayne Carter as a guy in the top of that 4-man rotation. I don't know that he's going to be a starter, but he's going to get meaningful snaps, or at least they should expect him to. And look, we loved Dwayne Carter in the pre-draft process. There was a ton of Bills fans who knew a lot about Dwayne Carter because he was in a ton of mock drafts to the Bills. A lot of fans liked his game, and the Bills made it happen. Obviously, with that extra pick they got in the trade down. And look, I think going into year one, it was a little bit, hey, we don't have to have huge expectations for this guy because we have Daquan Jones, we have Ed Oliver, we signed Austin Johnson, right? We have these guys, these veterans that can kind of bring him along. But in 2025, he's going to be relied on, and I think he's going to have to be part of a key part of that rotation, in addition to maybe whatever the Bills do in free agency and the draft. I think the interior of this defensive line needs a somewhat almost total overhaul. If you kind of assume Daquan Jones may be gone, or at best is gone after this year, you're left with Ed Oliver and Dwayne Carter really as the core of that defensive line interior. You need more than that. So I do think, again, as been the story with Bishop and Coleman, the injury kind of set him back a bit, but I'm hopeful that he will, and the Bills really need him to be a meaningful contributor, I think, in 2025.
Yeah, the number one thing for me for Dwayne Carter this offseason might be the weight room. I mean, he comes in at 305 pounds, and even in college, he was pushed around a little bit in the running game. He was more so a pass rushy type of guy. So the Buffalo Bills are going to have a new strength and conditioning coach in 2025. Ryan Nielsen, that Ringer article, he talked, Trey Hendrickson talked a bunch about how he changed his body composition under Ryan Nielsen at Ryan Nielsen's advice. So a lot of hoping here, right? But maybe in NFL offseason, Dwayne Carter gets into the weight room, get himself up to 310, 315 pounds. Because if he can get a more powerful anchor with those 33-inch arms and his pass rushing repertoire, he can be so much more versatile, so much more effective, and he can be on the field more if you can trust him more in the run game. Right now, I'm still confident, even if he's still 305 next season, that he can be Ed Oliver's direct backup and that he can get onto the field with Ed Oliver on obvious passing downs. But that's a limited role right now, unless he can add some power to his game and he can anchor better in the run game. Because I think for him, that was a red flag last year, some of the two-gapping and things that the Buffalo Bills were asking him to do. So you mentioned it. We were high on Carter last year in the pre-draft process. I am hoping the presence of Ryan Nielsen, a new strength and conditioning coach, a year of progression, I think all this could be a perfect storm for Dwayne Carter, and we can get the best version of him in 2025. And if we just then focus on adding one Tex to go along with Oliver and Carter, I think the Buffalo Bills could be cooking up something pretty nice.
Yeah, they could be, but we seem to have the same conversation every year when we get into the pre-draft process or even in free agency. We're like, oh, we need a one tech. We need a one, like before it was like to replace Star. Now it's like, okay, we had Daquan Jones, but we still needed someone behind him. And now Daquan Jones' play has dropped. It's like, we seem to have the same conversation about one tech every year with the Bills. And like, and Dwayne Carter's kind of that a little bit hybrid type of guy, probably going to be more of Ed Oliver's backup than he would be truly Jaquan Jones's backup. And so we're back at that same conversation again of needing a big body up front, whether it's a guy like Kenneth Grant, maybe from Michigan, right, in the draft or otherwise. But the Bills have an interior defensive line dilemma now. The contracts they have right now are what they are. They don't have a ton of depth. They have Carter, Oliver, and Daquan Jones is gone after 2025. There's not much in the way of practice squad sort of ceiling guys. I mean, I know we have Zion Logue, etc., but like it's just not there on the interior for this team. And that we've seen over the past couple of years what the Bills do in these situations. They bring guys in off the street like Jordan Phillips and Quentin Jefferson to kind of stop the bleeding. I want a real investment at this position. We saw how important it was in the Super Bowl. Jalen Carter, he's one of one. I get that, but like you really need an impactful interior defensive lineman that is almost just like the centerpiece almost of your defense, right? I feel like that's almost where you need to head to if you're the Buffalo Bills.
The next player up is Ray Davis, the 4th round running back, had 113 carries for 442 yards and 3 touchdowns. That is only 3.9 yards per carry average, but he was often the garbage time runner when everyone knew they were running. So he got stuffed on those runs a little bit. And I think that brings his yards per carry average down a little bit. I think anyone who watched Ray Davis last year felt pretty confident in what he's going to provide for the Buffalo Bills in the future. He added 17 catches on 19 targets for 189 yards and 3 touchdowns. The highlight of his season was the 150 all-purpose yards week 6 versus a very good Jets defense in place of an injured James Cook. He also had that big time 63-yard catch and run to put us ahead when we were down in the second half against the Miami Dolphins in week 9. His production did sort of shrink as the season went on, and it seemed like Joe Brady really started to rely a lot more on James Cook and Ty Johnson. But overall, a very, very good rookie year for the 4th round pick, Ray Davis.
Yeah, and it goes to show, right, like the Bills had kind of invested 2nd round pick in James Cook, a couple of 3rd round picks in Zach Moss and Devin Singletary, then Ray Davis in the trade down, right, with the Bears I think is the pick they got him with, right? I was very happy. I had high hopes for him coming into the season. He certainly has like the body and the build to be a 3-down back. I think he was kind of like the in-between guy, though, unfortunately, in 2024, right? He did have that good game against the Jets, as you mentioned, the big play against Miami, showed his ability as a pass catcher, but he was kind of like caught in between a bit, right? James Cook kind of being the early down guy, proving that he could run between the tackles and super efficient. And then they had Ty Johnson, who was the preferred kind of passing down back. They trusted him in pass protection and could catch the ball in his own right. So Ray Davis his skill sets were very versatile, but I guess they just were finding it hard, I guess, at the end of the season, trying to work him in. And like, as you mentioned, his efficiency didn't look great because they were at the beginning of the season, were just using him to pound into the defensive line, at the end of games just to run clock out. So honestly, Ray Davis, like, maybe had the most successful season of all these top 4 guys we just mentioned. And it's really nice to have him in tow. And it goes to show you are able to find guys, and who knows, maybe a 4th round running back. I know we don't have a 4th, but a day 3 running back in the 2025 draft could be someone that is more of a complement to Ray Davis, right? More of a slasher, more of a speed guy, like whatever it is that you're looking for in a running back to complement that room. But I do think a lot of this depends on what they do with Ty Johnson, right? Yeah. And sort of Ray Davis's role in 2024 kind of almost hinges on, is there a James Cook holdout on one end? And do they bring back Ty Johnson or draft the guy on the other end? But I do think there is a path for Ray Davis once again to get meaningful playing time in 2025.
Yeah, that was next up on my note sheet. It's just, we all were excited. We like what we saw from Ray Davis. We all can probably agree that he was the best immediate contributor of that draft class. But at the end of the day, what's his 2025 role? And I think it's dependent on whether the Buffalo Bills are going to have a 2-headed backfield or a 3-headed backfield and retain the services of Ty Johnson, keep James Cook in the fold, because if they keep James Cook in the fold but let Ty Johnson walk, who knows what ripple effect? Could that mean Ray Davis becomes more of the Ty Johnson passing down back because the Bills trust his pass blocking? Or do the Buffalo Bills shift James Cook to more of that pass catching role and give Ray Davis more of the goal line touches? Who knows what that ripple effect could be, how that could play out. If James Cook were to hold out and it's Ty Johnson and Ray Davis to start the year because, James Cook is getting his conditioning up, could Ray Davis take the Bulls by the horn and just create himself a role and become sort of an irreplaceable part of that rotation? There are just so many questions, but Ray Davis looks to be a key part of this Buffalo Bills offense for the next 3 seasons. And then, as Brandon Beane likes to do, probably going to burn him and churn him. But that's the way the business is for running backs in today's NFL. Some other rookies for the Buffalo Bills. I'm going to combine the next 4 guys. Cedric Van Pran-Granger, Tillin Grable, Edifon Ulofoshio, and Daquan Hardy. To me, right now, these guys are all backups. Grable has proven himself. Ulofoshio, Van Pran-Granger, and obviously Daquan Hardy being on the practice squad, they still need to earn the trust of the staff. But these guys all appear to be solid depth and appear to be ready to step up if needed because of injury.
Yeah, and I think this is maybe right now the assessment of this 2024 class, and we'll get to Solomon here in a second. It kind of rounds out the discussion about it. It feels like a very solid, if yet unspectacular draft class, and that's not a
depth filling class.
It does feel like a depth filling class, right? And like, I get it. You have high hopes for Keon Coleman, and there's Cole Bishop's possibly a starter, but it's like, you hope when you look back at this, maybe at the end of next year, is that like even the depth guys are still on the team. And as we get to the 2021 recap and we talk about how so many of these guys never even like sniff the team, it's the opposite with 2024, hopefully. And we say like, these guys are going to develop. They're still with the team. They may get thrust into a role in a game or two, depending on injury. But right now they are solid depth, at least it looks like for now.
Yeah, someone comes in, Spin says, Grable beat out Anderson in training camp for the jumbo 6 offensive lineman role, but got hurt. Somebody mentioned to me today on social media, and I've been sort of not listening to Bill's podcasts the way I usually do in season. And someone mentioned that Joe Marino said that David Edwards could possibly be a cap casualty this year for the Buffalo Bills to save some money, and that Alec Anderson and even Tillin Grable could compete for that left guard job for the Buffalo Bills, and you could see a change to the Buffalo Bills offensive line. I don't know how much I like that idea, but it does get me thinking, right? Tillin Grable is your swing tackle heading into the 2025 season. He showed a lot of promise. He even kicked inside to guard a little bit in the preseason. Maybe he's a guy who in 2026 is going to step in and possibly be your replacement for David Edwards. I really hope the Buffalo Bills extend Connor McGovern this offseason, but maybe Cedric Van Pran-Granger is a guy in 2026 who could be a guy you could look to start at center. Or if Connor McGovern gets hurt, it's just always nice to have that savvy type of, Georgia 4-year starter type of center behind him. So Ulofoshio, same. It's just nice to have that like guy who played a ton at the University of Washington in a very similar system to the Buffalo Bills. I'm really hoping that all of these guys can just maintain their spots on the roster, bide their time, and maybe, whether it's unfortunately due to injury or because a guy leaves, have a chance to step up in the future. But solid depth pieces, all is not lost in terms of maybe some of those guys turning into starters. Speaking of turning into starters, I saved this guy for last. No, not Travis Clayton. I do not think he's going to be the next Jordan Mailata. Javon Solomon. I think he's interesting because he is at a position of need for the Buffalo Bills, right? We see mid-rounders develop all the time at edge rusher. I'm looking at you, Mason Crosby. I'm looking at you, Josh Sweat, right? These guys were guys who were middle round draft picks. Solomon was really effective in his limited time in 2025. 14 tackles, 11 solo, 3 tackles for loss, 6 quarterbacks hits, 2 sacks, a forced fumble. Could the Buffalo Bills get a surprise contributor in Javon Solomon in 2025?
I mean, you certainly could if you cut Von Miller and take your medicine on that, take the $8 million cap saving from cutting Von Miller. Don't push any dead cap into 2026 if you cut him before June 1st, and that kind of vaults Javon Solomon into a role where he can be a meaningful contributor, right? You've got AJ Epinesa, Gregory Rousseau, then penciled in as your starters, with Solomon really the third guy in that rotation. If the Bills do cut Von Miller, if they don't re-sign Dwayne Smoot, we know Kingsley Jonathan's now gone off the team, got picked up. And so there's not a whole lot in the pipeline for the Bills from an edge rusher standpoint now, on the practice squad or on the active roster for that matter, if Von Miller's gone. So I do think it depends on sort of what the Bills want to do with Von Miller. If Von Miller's still around in 2025, then it's another year probably of Solomon maybe learning the tutelage from Von Miller, but maybe it's a little bit more playing time for him as well. I'm excited to see what he's got. We liked him in the pre-draft process. He was obviously hugely productive in college at the lower level, like had all those gaudy box score numbers in college. But the worry about him was the size. He did have long arms for someone as short as him. So the height, maybe not so much a concern, because he does have the long arms and he can get to the quarterback. So I'm excited about the prospects for Javon Solomon. It's nice to have a guy who has a little bit more of a ceiling in the edge room as far as the younger players than we've had in the past. So look, I would love for that to happen next year. I would love for that.
Yeah, this is obviously probably pretty dependent on whether the Buffalo Bills decide to move on from Von Miller, but you mentioned the long arms, 34-inch arms for Javon Solomon, 16 sacks his senior year. We saw that bend from him on tape. He was an exciting prospect, and edge setting in the run game is likely going to be key for him. But if we if we don't add a pass rushing stud, who really cares about the edge setting? Maybe Javon Solomon can just be a guy who plays on those pass rushing downs, and you can find a pass rushing role for him. But right now, I'd be pretty comfortable penciling him in as my defensive end number 4, because it'll be exciting to have sort of a ceiling type of guy there. So if you have Groot and you have Epinesa, and then hopefully you go out and find a stud, Myles Garrett, Max Crosby, Javon Solomon would be a great fourth to that, I think. So you can even add a guy in like the 3rd or the 4th round to be the 5th guy, and just have 2 young, exciting guys to go along with those other 3 that I mentioned. So I think Javon Solomon could be another one of those guys who really surprise and step up and becomes a highlight of this 2024 draft class. All right, enough of the 2024 class. Again, I'm not going to talk Travis Clayton being the next Jordan Mailata. If it happens, it happens. We can celebrate that one later. So let's talk a little bit now about the 2021 draft class, because this is the draft class that is now up in free agency, right? Spencer Brown was extended. Don't have to worry about that. Gregory Rousseau had his 5th-year option picked up. So really there's only one free agent that remains. Let's just take a look real quick at the first 3 picks of this draft, because we talked this offseason about the Buffalo Bills wanting to put an emphasis on size. Well, here's an example of the Buffalo Bills putting an emphasis on size, right? You had Gregory Rousseau in the 1st round, and this was the COVID draft, obviously, of 2021. So there wasn't a lot of in-person meetings and, pro days and all that stuff, but a solid double, maybe triple that the Buffalo Bills hit here with Gregory Rousseau. Sacks by season, 4.8, 5.8. He's an elite edge setter. He's really your prototypical length and strength defensive end. However, every time we think, hey, maybe he can be more than just a length and strength defensive end, he kind of goes quiet in big moments. But for pick number 30, that is a solid selection. It'll be interesting to see if we can lock him up long-term. Would not want to pay him somewhere in the 20s, which is what a lot of people maybe suggest as a possible number for Gregory Rousseau. Then you got Boogie Basham, and some of the names that were drafted in the 15 picks after Boogie Basham really sting. But again, we loved Boogie Basham in the pre-draft process, so we missed on Boogie Basham as well. But Creed Humphrey, Andre Sisco, Aleem McNeil, Milton Williams, Osa Ogidozua, Paulson Adebo, all drafted within the 15 picks after Boogie Basham.
Aleem McNeil, man. Oh my God. Don't tell me that.
we talk about wanting to add size this offseason, but you gotta hit. You gotta hit if you do. And then there was Spencer Brown, which is by all accounts a home run. I mean, this guy should have been an All-Pro in 2024. It took a couple of years. Development isn't linear, but he's going to be a cornerstone player for this football team, and he is locked up. So the Buffalo Bills hit 2 of the first 3 in the first 3 rounds, both trench players. That's not bad, despite the sting that is Boogie Basham.
Yeah, and if that Boogie Basham pick was either Creed Humphrey or Lee McNeil, can you imagine the praise we'd be getting for this?
We probably have a Lombardi.
I mean, here's the thing, right? Like Spencer Brown, his development was not linear, obviously. I mean, he ascended, right? And he may end up looking like the best pick of the Bills made in that class, even more so than Rousseau. Like you could argue that Spencer Brown is a better player than Rousseau. And now you're talking about 2 of the first 3 picks the Bills made in that draft. And that's a really good pick. Those are really good picks out, whatever you want to say about Boogie Basham and like question it, that's fine. But Rousseau, the length, you can't teach it, right? And so while maybe he doesn't have the sack numbers, he is getting into the backfield. He is batting passes down. He is making an impact. And the question becomes, is he worth the type of contract that guys like Brian Burns or the like are getting, right? That type of contract. He's not going to be in the Bosa range or the TJ Watt range or the Myles Garrett range, but he's probably going to be in that next tier down of guys who have gotten contracts like Brian Burns or Montez Sweat, or even a Bryce Huff, right, from the Eagles. And so he's going to be somewhere in that range. He's going to probably get $20 million plus AAV. So the question will be, is it going to be from the Bills or someone else? And I talk about, again, creating holes just for the sake of creating holes. Obviously, he's here for 2025. The bigger question is what happens beyond that. But man, him and Spencer Brown, 2 really solid picks, and really, really also happy for Spencer Brown because he battled through some injuries and some questions we had on him as well. There were drafts in recent years where we're like, the Bills need to take a tackle, right? Because we weren't sure about the injury history with Spencer Brown. He's kind of shut us up for now on that. So good for him, and also love the attitude he plays with. So look, 2 out of 3, pretty solid and meaningful contributors for this team.
When you look at the second half of that draft, and again, Brandon Beane, I remember him mentioning it in his post, his post draft press conference. He's like, I was just kind of throwing darts at the wall. We didn't really have a chance to go out and visit like we normally do because of COVID, et cetera. I thought that was, I called him out because I was like pretty early on in our podcasting days. I called him out. I thought it was a weak response. I was like, you have plenty of college film on these guys. Like, take whoever you think are the best college players. Who cares if you can't do background checks on them? You can figure it out when they get there. They're late round flyers anyway. But he took Tommy Doyle, Marquez Stevenson, Damar Hamlin, Rashad Wildgoose, and Jack Anderson. Tommy Doyle retired due to injuries just this week. He'll always have that wild card touchdown against New England. Wildgoose and Anderson couldn't crack the 53 the year they were drafted. They were both claimed on waivers, so they never had a chance to develop within the Buffalo Bills system. They both stuck around. They might even, if I Google them, be on a roster right now. Wouldn't shock me. Marcus Stevenson obviously did not work out. No wide receiver drafted him. Makes you upset. The best receiver drafted after Marcus Stevenson was Ben Skoranek. I went through Wikipedia and looked at every receiver drafted after Marcus Stevenson today. They took the speed. It didn't work out. And then obviously Damar Hamlin, he has served a purpose in his 4 years here. There was obviously that circumstance that occurred in Cincinnati. Everyone understands, that moment and what's happened since then and all those things, right? Damar Hamlin is a special person. He is special to this community. But I could still maybe see a second contract for him. But personally, I think he's going to end up walking this offseason. So really not much outside of Damar Hamlin on day 3 for the Buffalo Bills in this draft class.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because some of those guys kind of maybe had some ceiling, right? Jack Anderson was not to use a pun here, but he was a jack of all trades on the offensive line and thought he could be a guy that could fulfill maybe multiple backup positions there. Wild Goose had the athletic ability, thought maybe he would, serve a depth role at some point. And Stevenson had the chance to be the primary returner for this team, but injuries really derailed him early as well in his Bills tenure. And ultimately he never really got a chance to kind of make an impact. I think injuries really played a factor for him and just could never really get on the field. So unfortunately, really pretty low impact as far as the rest of that draft after the first 3 rounds. Yes, Hamlin started this year, and we know that. But again, I'm sort of in the camp of no second contract for Hamlin. I'm going to let the chips fall where they may, wish him the best, and hope he gets a little bit of a nice contract somewhere else. But if the Bills do bring him back for a very cheap deal, then okay, I'm not going to be upset about it. I think I would be more upset if the Bills don't continue to invest in young talent at the safety position.
And the back half of this draft is honestly almost like the exact opposite of the back half of the 2024 draft.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
You look, it's like the Bills finally figured out the sweet spot of drafting talented football players that can make your 53-man roster, because they had struggled with that. Because even in drafts after this draft, they lost Nick Broker. They lost Alex Austin. That one stings. That one really stings, Alex Austin. He's a good player for New England. And the Buffalo Bills have a need at cornerback. Like, yikes, that one stings. I don't think we talk about that enough, but
let's not talk about it.
But then in the same realm, you have Brandon Beane drafting Justin Shorter in the 5th round because he plays special teams and passing on Xavier Hutchinson, Trey Palmer, and Puka Nacua, 3 guys who we loved in the pre-draft process. And it's not playing revisionist history. These are things that we said live on air. Like, dude, we took a 6th and 7th round receiver when there was still like guys we had day 2 grades on the board in the 5th round. Like, we were in the moment upset with that pick and questioning that pick. So it's okay for us to do it again now, in my opinion. But they finally found that sweet spot because Ulofoshio should probably make this roster all 4 years, right? Same with Cedric Van Pran Granger, Tillin Grable. So the Buffalo Bills finally seem to have found that sweet spot. And yeah, Trey Palmer, downfield separator. How nice would that be right now? Like, so we're not gonna get too under the weeds with that this evening. But thank you guys so much for joining us this evening. Dave, before we head out of here, any final thoughts?
Salary cap show Wednesday, obviously. Yes. We're both going to be on it. Greg's going to be kind of obviously moderating that. We hinted a little bit about some possible, we talked about David Edwards tonight as a possible, like, I'm going to throw an idea out there on that show that involves a big time edge rusher and David Edwards for the Bills as a possible transaction to make. And again, not necessarily something I want or predict is going to happen, but an idea that maybe we haven't talked about yet. So tune in on Wednesday to hear that one.
Yeah, really looking forward to that on Wednesday. And obviously, if you're looking to support this show, there are 3 things that you can do. Number 1, you can smash that like button. Number 2, you can click that share button and share it with anyone you think might enjoy conversations like the one we had tonight. And number 3, once the show is done being live and it is on demand for your viewing pleasure, going back to the replay and leaving a comment in the replay, that helps drive up the algorithm and gets us in front of more eyeballs. But really looking forward, not just to that salary cap show on Wednesday, but we get to start talking draft prospects again next week, and not just Senior Bowl guys, right? Because we did that Senior Bowl show and people were like, talk about this guy. And we're like, hold your horses, right? We're just talking about Senior Bowl guys. We're just talking about Shrine Bowl guys. We'll get to those guys when we get to the combine. So we're going to do a combine preview next week. I've been sort of trying to figure out how to structure that show because I don't want to go for 3 hours. I'm thinking maybe we focus on edge rusher, IDL, corner, wide receiver, and then maybe have like a segment where there's other guys in other positions we want to keep our eye out for. So me and you will talk a little bit behind the scenes about that, but expect a defensive heavy show next week as we talk about the NFL Combine and all of those defensive linemen, more defensive linemen than I think have been invited the last couple of years to the Combine. So a lot.
It's a good year to have 2. It's a good year to have 2 second-round picks if it's a good year for
and then compensatory 4th and a compensatory 5th. So the Bills should have a 1, 2 2s, 2 4s, 3 4s, 3 4s, 5.
Have the comp picks been announced?
No, it's just projected they're going to get a 4th and the
Okay.
5th for Floyd and Davis. So the Bills are going to have a
Well,
number of picks there.
Yeah, remember last year we thought we were gonna get what was it?
So maybe a
3rd
5th and a 6th, maybe a 5th and a 6th.
Yeah, so and didn't get it.
Brandon
so,
Beane is still salty about that. But
yeah, pretty salty.
anyway, thank you guys. Thank you guys so much for joining us. You guys are awesome as always. And until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comment section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!